So this afternoon we will start looking at story, how to tell a story, the opportunities you might have. My grandmother, who's in glory, she used to tell stories that we would, as 7 grandsons, we would kind of look at each other and just start mouthing back a little bit without her really realising, because she had glaucoma at one point, she couldn't see us to hit us. But she would go, she was going to tell us a story, and then she'd say, well, it was so-and-so, he married Phil. Was it Phil he married? No, it was Steve he married. And anyway, she'd start to tell a story and go, well, they owned a corner dairy. Do you know the one? They had it for about, I think it was 4 years. Actually, it was only 3, I think. And you sit there going, get to the point. And we'd finally yell, get to the point, and she'd start to tell us the point. But story can either evaporate in front of you and you lose the opportunity, or you can capture it. And when you're building relationships and when you're working with people and you're about to tell a story in the context of relationship, you often get between 2 to 4 minutes to tell your story because they want to tell one, or you've lost them. So we're going to have a look at some of the things that might be useful in that. Okay, we're getting there. So we're going to think about the power of the story. And one of the things is to be thinking about your life as a series of incidences, series of potential stories, because your life is a chain of stories. That's why we call it his story. It's her story or his story. It's your story broken up into events in your life. And people love hearing stories. And some of the opportunities you'll get are simply to tell an incident out of your life that just engages with the person, and it's just an experience that you've had. And when you're building relationships, to be able to tell your life stories in just a relaxed way that we're going to show you is very powerful. Yet other times you'll have opportunities to share your God experiences in the same kind of way, and to be able to share faith-based moments that you have had that lead you on to be able to start to talk about deeper issues of faith. If you think about people you know who can tell good stories, and think about what is it about their stories that captivates you, and you'll start to see what we're trying to talk about this afternoon. But one of the questions I have for you is why are stories powerful? Why are they so powerful? Their life experiences? Somebody else?
They're yours and you can't argue against them.
They're yours and they can't argue against them. And that's one of the powerful things of stories. And here are some others. You've got some space to write this down. The first part is that they have interest. People are interested in the things that happen to each other. You just have to watch the news and those kind of things. And we hook into that because they're telling you story after story after story. And we hook into it because we're interested in story. The second one is that it gives you information. When telling stories, you pass on heaps of knowledge to people. The Bible is a book of story. You go through and you can read this story and this one and this one. And if you look at it from that point of view too, when you have opportunity in a relationship, you can tell biblical story just as you could tell your own, but you just tell it as a story. You don't necessarily have to take your Bible out and turn to the page and read it. When you know the story, tell it as a story, because that's how it was told in the first place. The third thing is imagination. It helps people remember what you're talking about. It draws their imagination to engage with you. And then the next part there is that it brings involvement. People get caught up when you tell a story well. And then they start to identify with the people and the event that you're talking about. And then it triggers for them events or incidences that are similar in their life, or they know other people have had something going on the same. So it produces this chain reaction for them, if you like. And most of the great communicators have been storytellers, and Jesus is probably the prime example of that. And if we had time, we'd look at some of his parables and see how long he took telling those. Some of them were only 30 seconds or around about that length of time. So stories are so powerful to connect with the heart and the imagination of people around you. We're going to look at and think about how do we go about telling our stories, and later on you're going to have a chance to tell yours, not all out front unfortunately, but on your piece of paper there you've got the letters going down your page which read impact if you look at them. And so we're going to take a moment to think about an incident in your life. We're going to look at what those words mean, but think of an incident out of your life that taught you a lesson. That's what we're going to use as an example to teach ourselves how to tell an effective story that has impact. And we're going to use the impact template to let you do that, to be able to tell an effective story in 2 minutes. It's a real skill because we'll tend to want to tell too much. And so there are 6 components, 6 elements that give your story impact. And the first one that we have there, and unfortunately I thought I was going to have a whiteboard, but never mind. The I for impact is incident. So if you just write incident beside the I, incident. And then beside that you might want to write one single event. So when we're talking about an incident, we're talking about one single event in telling a good story. For example, for most of us, we've been to a camp, we come back, and we might tell a story to people in this kind of way. You know, the camp last weekend was just so inspirational. We had this old joker come to talk to us. It was like a certifiable monument. But when we looked at him, he talked about the Bible, and then he talked about parts of the Bible, and then, it was just so good what he talked about. And then he also talked about other parts of the Bible. And what have you learned? Nothing. But if you think it in this kind of way, you might have said, we sat around a campfire last weekend, and a person talked to us, and he began telling us about a God who is a God of grace. Which was better? The second, because we're now starting to focus down on what we call a single incident. So a story is a snapshot of an incident. And the first thing you need to do is to select and tell important parts of the incident. And so if you look at that picture, you've got a car over the side, the bloke's still sitting in the seat, the boat's ready to follow him. There's a shortcut to the river. But we need to focus our talk on the people around that boat out there and around the ute and about the guy in the ute. That's where the story is. We don't need to talk about the geology of the rocks around him or the kind of forestry that's sitting there, right? But in another situation, the geology might be really important. So we'll talk about that. So we have to focus down on what is the incident that we want to use that will have impact in the situation I find myself in to tell this current story. Most of you probably are aware of Google Earth and have had a play with it on your computer. Has anyone been able to do that? You've gone to Google Earth. It's fascinating, isn't it? You type in your home address, and next second that blue globe goes, and you roll around to your home address. I wish we could move that fast, really. Roll around to a picture of New Zealand. And then as you watch it, it goes, and then you see the North Island. And then it just keeps on going down until you can see Hamilton. And then finally, you see yourself out there mowing the lawn. Right? Should have been one of the sons, but it's always you, isn't it? And it's always you every time you go back. But what have they done? They have taken you from this huge picture, and instead of talking about the world, they've got down to talk about you mowing lawns. Right? And so when you're telling a good story, that's what you have to do, because the detail of the whole thing is really important to you, but it isn't important to the person listening, and it's not important to the impact of the story. And so one of the first things to do is to think about how do you bring it down to a single incident. So what I'd like you to do for a moment now on your piece of paper is to think of an incident or an event in your life that is one single incident that taught you a lesson. Now, we're not going to go spiritual at the moment because this is just the practice thing. So just think of an incident. For example, for my one that I'm thinking of is injuring myself on Mount Ruapehu and nearly ending up paralyzed. So that's the incident, okay? It's not a spiritual one, although I prayed like crazy. And God answered my prayer. But just think of an incident out of your life and just take a moment and write down very briefly what it is that taught you a lesson. We're going to unpack it further, but just take a moment to write that down. Don't be too selective. Just pick one, write it. You're not going to share it with too many people. You are going to share it, but not with too many people. And we're not worried about how good the story is at the moment. We want to teach you the template so you learn to be able to use it all the time. And don't get tempted to write it out as a book. Just something that tells you this is what I'm going to talk about later on. Okay, now on impact, we've had I, which is the incident, a single incident. Now we come to the M, which is the magic 3 words. So you might like to write down magic 3 words. Magic 3 words. And these words set the scene. They are words that will draw people in quite quickly. For example, I could start my story with, when I was going to talk to you today, I thought about telling you about my dog. But then I thought, no, I think I'll talk about my horse. But I realized actually that I don't have a horse, so I can't actually tell you about that. However, the dog, we had a dog. We have a dog? No, we didn't. Actually, it was a cat. Come to think of it, was a cat that we had. We've had several cats, actually, but the one I want to talk about is this is the middle one out of 3. We had 3 cats. You're gone, haven't you, really? It's all over. So what we want to do with the 3 magic words is help you set the scene for them. So they're not wandering off thinking about the size of the horse or the colour of the dog, or whether he had 1 or 3 or 5. We want to set the scene. So the words you're going to use are when, where, and who. And you've got a space there. When, where, and who. So it defines quickly the situation you're going to find yourself in, and it allows them to picture very quickly where you are so they can join you. If it's the kitchen, it's the kitchen. They see a kitchen. They don't have to see the same kitchen that you see in your head, but they see a kitchen and they're right there with you. Okay? So we want to set those kinds of things there. For example, last Tuesday I was at Caleb board meeting at Denny's restaurant at 6 o'clock in the morning. So you've got the who, was me. The where was Denny's restaurant. When? Last Tuesday. Okay? And then I can go on to the rest of the story. So you're all picturing, if you haven't been to Denny's restaurant, you're picturing a restaurant. And you know it's me, and then you know these other things. So instantly we've got you to the one place. So what do these questions do? What do these magic 3 questions do you think? Somebody give me some feedback on that.
They set the scene, and they stop confusion or people wondering about those questions. And I think you could apply that to anything you're talking about in life.
Okay, so they've set the scene, they cut out confusion, and they stop you wandering off thinking about something else, counting the bricks on the wall, and those kind of things, okay? So they do those things, who, when, and where. So I'd like you to take a moment. Let me tell you the ones for my Ruapehu story. Late one winter, I was on the slopes of Mount Ruapehu. So who? It's me again. Where? Slopes of Mount Ruapehu. When? Late winter. Didn't need to know the date, but you know that it's going to be covered in snow. Not all of it, unfortunately. Now I want you, on your piece of paper, having taken your incident that you just wrote a moment ago, I want you to think about the 3 magic questions that you'll use. Who, when, and where. And just write who and put who it is, when, write down something like that, and where it happened. And we're going to be trying to do this in 10 words or less. Mine was 9. So it's not to ramble, it's setting the scene. Have a go, just write it out on your piece of paper. Who, when, and where for your story, your single incident. Shouldn't take too long to write that. Would somebody like to read what they've written for the who, when, and where and see if you can put it in a sentence? Way down the back. Yes, please, sir. Okay, so we had all the who, the when, and the where, South Island, the date, and the people involved. Thank you. Very good. Somebody else?
When I was working at Concord Industrial Site a few years ago.
Okay, so it's him. He's at an Concord industrial site and a few years ago. So we know it's history, and it's not just yesterday. So we know who, when, and where. And one of the skills in telling a good story is knowing what to leave out, not what to put in. So that was just a little bit more than 10 words, but that's okay. If you're aiming for around about the 10, it stops you dribbling on forever. And so that then brings us to the next thing, and the impact that you have there was a P, and that is for power line. Power line. Power line. Yes, like in a power line where you put power down a line. Power line, yep. Just write that down. And then beside that, write a concise ending or short ending. Yes, about that particular incident, your power line would be one short ending, a succinct ending. No, you don't want a short on a power line. Boy, I was slow getting that one. And we're using the start of our power line that we're going to use is, and the lesson I learnt was. So you might want to write down, and the lesson I learnt was. You can end it all sorts of ways, but for our practice, we're going to have, and the lesson I learnt was. And so for my story, and the lesson I learnt was that one more is often one too many. Okay? And the lesson I learnt was that one more is often one too many. So just think for a moment. Because for a lot of people, you end and you skip your ending. You know, like you could say, you know. So I guess there's many things I learned on Mount Ruapehu that day, and I'm very grateful for understanding the nature of the geology of the area. I found out a lot about the medical science that goes on a mountain and how doctors deal with major injury. And I suppose I could also found that, you know, there's a biblical thing here, there's a bit of spirituality here, that God was with me, and that when I cried out, He actually heard me. And we could refer to Hezekiah chapter 3, verse 51, because, and everyone's gone home. Because what we've done is we've hit the ground with the end of our story, bounced, ended it again, bounced, ended again. So power line means one succinct ending that gives it the power of your story, that brings the impact fully. Take a moment on your piece of paper to think about what your power line might be to your story. What is the succinct ending that will give your story impact when we listen to it? Have you had a moment? And that's usually just one sentence, maybe two. It's not a whole lot. Would somebody like to stand up and read what they've written, or give? Way down the back, you've given your first one. Let's hear your end. Okay, so he was badly injured and his bike's wrecked, and that's the end of his story. And it'd be really interesting to see how that process happened. Somebody else?
Ambiguous signs are potentially deadly.
Woohoo! Ambiguous signs are potentially deadly. Very good, sir. Watch how you place yourself. Okay, so as we've heard the story, the impact of the story is there. The power line is to watch yourself. And it would be really interesting to hear the rest of that story as we go on. The fourth thing on impact was the A, and that is for appropriate. Appropriate. So it has to be appropriate for the situation you're about to tell a story in. So you could tell a story about successfully skiing on Mount Ruapehu, but in my story it isn't successful. There's lots of pain and anguish involved in it. So it's making sure that it is appropriate and that it adds to what you're hoping to get across in the conversation you're having. And as I said before, there's two. Some, it's just a story out of your life because you're building the relationship, you're wanting to engage with the person, you're wanting to share part of who you are so they get to know who you are and they can see the reality of who you are as a person and a follower of Jesus. Other times your story will have spiritual impact. Your story will be telling about a faith encounter that you've had, a discovery about God that you had, or how God has come to meet you in some kind of way or to answer prayer, and those stories are powerful in that context. So it's thinking, what is the appropriate story I need to tell right now? And instantly you'll be thinking, as you've heard these other people giving their Magic 3 and giving their power lines, oh, I've got a story like that. Oh, I've got a story like that. So it generates other stories for you. Number 5, the C is for colour. Colour. And then beside that, you put down your details. Your details. So the colour of a story is all the detail you're going to put into it. And we're going to have 2 minutes for our stories. So we've got about 100 seconds to put colour into our story. And everyone goes, it's not long. Well, you ask the people that had their oxygen masks drop out of the aircraft overhead here. 2 minutes was a very long time for them. And when you're telling a story and you're telling it well, 2 minutes is a long period of time. And you can get a lot across in 2 minutes. So it's your colour, it's the actions, it's the surroundings, and it answers these questions. What, why, and how? What, why, and how? Those are the questions you're answering with the colour. What was happening? Why was it happening? And how did it happen? So take a moment and think about your story and bullet point down the what, the why, and the how. Don't write out a lot of sentence because as soon as you do that, guess what you're going to do? You're going to put your head down and read it. But as this gentleman said here, as Warwick said, it's your story. It can't be argued against. So avoid writing it down. Just bullet point to remind you what you're going to say. That will help you also to clarify the detail that is important and leave out the detail that's not. So for my story, I focus on making the slide down the side of Ruapehu, sliding down it, smacking into a rock, ending up in the middle of the valley, and can't feel my legs. That's the guts of my story. I could go on with all sorts of other things, why I was up there in the first place, what happened after that, the trip in the ambulance and how painful that was, the fear that I'd never walk again, and other things. And somebody who was skiing past me saying, are you all right? Abundantly clear I wasn't. You don't yell out when you're happy, the kind of things I was yelling out. So having written those things down, you then come to the T of impact, which is time. It's the time you're going to take to tell a story. And as we mentioned earlier, it's 2 minutes. When you get good at telling story, you might go for 3 or 4 minutes. But initially, practice getting it down for your 2 minutes to help you to do that. And let's have a look at this slide here, which shows you how this now unfolds when you're telling a story. First of all, the right length of the story, as we said here, for impact. We're talking about having impact in telling a story, not just telling a whole lot big story, is that you take 2 minutes. And then the 2 minutes is broken up in this kind of way. First, the Magic 3, it's about 5 or 10 seconds because you're only telling 10 words and then rolling in. Now, the order of those who, when, and where can be any order. They just have to be in there. Okay? And then you roll into the rest of the story. Then you've got your power line at the end, which is about 10 or 20 seconds, which is giving them the power of the story, putting in the point of the story, the impact of your story. And so that leaves you with a whopping 100 seconds to tell it. Who, when, and where, roll straight in, you've set the scene, and away you go, telling the story, telling it with colour, and all of those kind of things, with passion, with hand action, with whatever else, and then straight into your power line at the end, which lands the aircraft and lets them understand the point of your story. Have you all got that down all right? Not quite. You're doing really well. Straight after lunch is always difficult as the body is dealing with carbohydrate instead of anything else. Yes. Hopefully not on my watch. So let's have a look at impact again. So we said it was an incident, a single incident. It has the magic three, which are who, when, and where. It has a power line, which is a concise ending, and that's one or two sentences. It is the right length, which is how long? 2 minutes. And it has colour, it has your details, and then we said it was appropriate. So as you think through those things, we're now going to have a go at it. So what I'd like you to do now is get your story and get yourself ready and make sure you know what your magic three are, your power line is, you've got your bullet points, all right? And Derek's going to time 2 minutes. I want you to find somebody. It might pay to shift around the room a little bit. And then when you've got into your pairs, one of you decide you're going to start, then Derek will ring the bell and you start your story just straight into your three magics and straight on to your details and then finish with your power line. At the end of 2 minutes, Derek's going to ring the bell and at that point just stop, okay? All right, if you'd like to stop, how many of you have been finished for the last 2 minutes? Okay, so some of us got through really fast. All right, so that means for you, you can think about what colour did I leave out that I could have actually put in? What were some of the more details that I could, like late winter I was on the slopes of Mount Ruapehu, I hurt myself. One more is often one too many. The lesson I learned was, I could have filled that out. Okay, so if you finish really quickly, it's probably the colour because your three magics have got sorted and your power line you've got sorted. Okay, how many of you found that you enjoyed the experience of telling the story from your own life in such a succinct way? Those who are listening, how many of you thought, oh, this is terrible? Just look the other way. There's always one. Okay. You need to practice it too. You need to think about other incidences in your life later on and just write down your magic three, write down your power line, bullet point a couple of things and think, right, I'll practice that and one day I can just use it somewhere. Because your whole life is your history with Jesus. So think about all the stories, just when you're a kid, when you're at school, when you're at work, whatever, and just practice telling incidents. And then start thinking about your spiritual ones. When did I first encounter God? When I first prayed and had a prayer answered? When did this happen? When my kids were sick, what happened? Did I pray? What happened in those cases? And think about the different situations where that has happened and what God has done for you. And because when you practice them, you have them ready. And as you're building a relationship, you don't have to say, well, hang on, I'll use this one. It's already locked in here. And away you go. You know you're going to tell three magics, you're going to tell the detail, and then you're going to end with the power line. And as you're telling the story, you're going for your power line. You understand where you're heading with it because of the situation. And so it comes naturally. So go and enjoy that. And enjoy hearing each other's stories. Thank you.